The first thing I noticed was the champagne. Not the wall of windows overlooking Manhattan, not the white orchids, not the string quartet playing something expensive and vaguely judgmental near the staircase. Champagne. Specifically, the glass in my younger brother's hand. Aiden Blake, 27, Omega, my younger brother, looked triumphant. Across the ballroom stood Carter Hale, 32, Alpha, founder and CEO of Hale Meridian, a fast-rising real estate technology company headquartered in New York. 6'2", expensive tuxedo, silver watch, perfect public manners. The kind of man financial magazines described as disciplined, because none of the reporters had ever watched him reorganize someone else's life one decision at a time. In my first life, he had been my fiancé. In this one, he was about to become my brother's problem. Elliot. Aiden said my name softly, as if we were standing at a funeral instead of Carter's annual investor gala at the plaza. I took a sip of sparkling water. I have to tell you something. Aiden's fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. Carter and I are together. There it was. In my first life, that sentence had arrived 7 months later, after I had spent years believing Carter's criticism was concern, his jealousy was devotion, and his need to know where I was every hour was simply the burden of being loved by a powerful alpha. This time Aiden had moved faster. Good for him. Efficiency should be rewarded. I looked at Carter. He didn't look ashamed. Of course he didn't. His gaze stayed on me with that calm executive patience he used in negotiations. The expression that said he was waiting for everyone else to become reasonable enough to agree with him. Aiden mistook my silence for devastation. His shoulders relaxed. That was almost funny. Almost. Then a warm voice appeared beside my right ear. "Should I be worried that you're staring at another man this intensely?" I turned. Dominic Grant stood beside me. 34, Alpha, CEO of Grant Atlantic Holdings, one of the largest privately held logistics and infrastructure groups in the United States. He had inherited part of the company from his grandfather and spent a decade turning it into something Wall Street treated with a combination of respect and mild anxiety. He was also my boyfriend. Not that Aiden knew. Not yet. Dominic's black tuxedo fit him too well to be innocent. His dark brown hair was slightly disordered at the front, as if he had run a hand through it during the elevator ride. His eyes, gray-blue under the ballroom lights, moved from me to Carter to Aiden and back again. He assessed the scene in approximately 3 seconds. Then the corner of his mouth lifted. "Oh," he murmured. "This is that brother." I elbowed him. He leaned closer. "You said jealous. You didn't say theatrical." I was trying to be charitable. Terrible habit. Aiden stared at us. Carter's expression changed. Not much, but I knew him well enough to recognize the moment control left the room without asking his permission. Dominic reached for my hand. He did it slowly, not to claim me, not to prove anything. He simply turned his palm upward between us and waited. That was what he always did, he offered. I chose. My fingers settled into his. His thumb brushed once across my knuckles. Aiden went pale. "Elliot," he said. "Who is this?" Dominic looked at me. I could feel his amusement vibrating through our joined hands. I should have answered normally. I really should have. Instead, I smiled. "This," I said, "is the reason I'm not upset." A silence opened around us. Somewhere behind the orchids, a violinist continued playing with the heroic professionalism of a man who had seen rich people ruin parties before. Carter stepped forward. "Grant." Dominic's eyes shifted to him. "Hale." The two alphas looked at each other. There was no growling, no ridiculous dominance contest. No room-shaking pheromone battle like something written by a teenager who had learned biology from fan fiction. Just stillness. Carter was good at stillness. Dominic was better. "What exactly is going on?" Carter asked. Dominic's fingers tightened gently around mine. "I was about to ask the same thing," he said. Aiden's chin lifted. "Carter chose me." I almost laughed. Not because he was wrong. Because I had once said those exact words inside my own head. Carter chose me, as if being chosen were the same thing as being loved. Dominic glanced at me. He caught the change in my expression. The humor disappeared from his face. For one brief second, the ballroom blurred around the edges, because I remembered another room, another life. Another version of myself standing in a penthouse kitchen at midnight while Carter calmly explained why I should quit my job, because he made enough money for both of us and an Omega with a serious relationship needed different priorities. I remembered agreeing. I remembered becoming smaller, so gradually I mistook it for compromise. Then Dominic's thumb moved across my hand again. Once, present, steady, here, I inhaled. Aiden was still speaking. I know this hurts, he said, and his voice had softened into something almost compassionate. But maybe this is for the best. I looked at him. He had no idea. Not about Carter, not about my first life, not about the night everything in me had finally gone quiet. Not about waking up 5 years earlier with my cheek pressed against a library desk in Boston and a student ID that said I was 23 again. Carter took another step toward us. His gaze dropped to Dominic's hand around mine. You two are together? Dominic answered before I could. Yes. Something cold passed through Carter's eyes, and there it was, the look I remembered. Not heartbreak. Possession interrupted. Dominic saw it too. His posture changed almost imperceptibly. Then Carter smiled, a controlled smile. Since when? Dominic's reply was mild. Long enough. Aiden looked from him to me. How long? I opened my mouth, and that was when every screen in the ballroom went black. The music cut off. The lights dimmed. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Carter's head snapped toward the stage. One of his assistants rushed across the room, white-faced. Mr. Hale, she whispered, we have a problem. The giant presentation screen flickered. A file appeared, then another, then a spreadsheet, then a board memo. And suddenly, in front of 200 investors, journalists, executives, and people who had spent the evening congratulating Carter on Hale Meridian's flawless quarter, the company's most carefully hidden internal disaster was glowing 50 feet high. Aiden whispered, "What is that?" Carter did not answer. Dominic looked at the screen, then at me, and for the first time that night, even he looked surprised. Because I knew exactly what those documents were. I had seen them before, in another life. 3 years too late. Carter turned toward me. His face had gone completely still. "Elliot," he said. My pulse kicked. Dominic moved half a step in front of me, not enough to hide me, enough to remind the room that I was not standing alone. Carter's eyes narrowed. "You did this." Dominic moved half a step closer, his hand still warm around mine. Aiden stared at the enormous screen, his victory smile finally gone. I knew what Carter was about to accuse me of. I also knew the truth was much stranger than anything he could imagine. Before I tell you how an archive box, a jealous brother, and 2 very different alpha CEOs brought us to this ballroom, stay with me. And if you enjoy second chance BL stories where love is earned through choices instead of possession, follow the channel so we can share the next one too. Because 5 years earlier, I had already learned exactly what it cost to mistake control for love. And then I woke up 23 again. I woke up with my face stuck to a legal pad. This was not dignified. If reincarnation had a customer service department, I would like to formally complain about presentation. My neck hurt. My right hand was numb. A fluorescent lamp buzzed above me with the aggression of a mosquito that had recently discovered union rights. I lifted my head. The room was small, windowless, and familiar. Harvard's Widener Library Archives Department. I stared at the gray shelving, then at the half-finished metadata sheet under my cheek, then at my hands. No engagement ring. For several seconds, my brain simply refused to participate. My name was Elliot Blake. I had been 28 years old. I had worked as a digital archives specialist at a private museum in Manhattan. I had been engaged to Carter Hale for 3 years. I looked at the date on my phone. September 14, 5 years earlier. My stomach dropped. In my first life, I had been 23 on September 14 and finishing a graduate fellowship in archival science in Boston. I stood so quickly the chair rolled backward and hit a filing cabinet. "Excellent," I whispered. Reborn and immediately attacking furniture. The sound of my own voice made the room feel stranger. I went to the bathroom. The mirror showed a younger version of me. Same dark blonde hair that never decided whether to curl or wave. Same hazel eyes. Same pale omega skin that flushed too easily whenever I was embarrassed, angry, cold, hot, alive, or apparently existing near a mirror. But the tension around my mouth was gone. The faint line between my brows was gone. I looked like someone who still believed sleep was supposed to work. I gripped the sink. The memories came in pieces. Carter choosing my clothes for business events, because I looked best when styled cleanly. Carter reading messages over my shoulder. Carter smiling when he suggested that moving to New York would be better for my career, then arranging a job through one of his donors before I could apply anywhere else. The final collapse had not been violent. It had been worse in a quieter way. I had discovered irregularities in Hale Meridian's charitable redevelopment arm. Public grants routed into shell vendors, historic properties intentionally misclassified to speed demolition approvals, community contracts promised and never fulfilled, As an archivist, I noticed patterns, dates, signatures, versions of documents that should not have existed at the same time. I had confronted Carter privately. He had looked at me for a long time. Then he had asked me to sign a confidentiality agreement, not as his employee, as his fiancé. That was the moment something inside me finally split cleanly enough to see. I refused. Within 2 weeks, my museum contract was restructured, invitations vanished, and a donor hinted that I had become unstable. Carter never shouted. He only said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." 3 days later, I walked out. A week after that, exhaustion and a winter storm turned a minor highway accident outside Stamford into the end of my first life. Snow, headlights, a horn, then silence. Now I was 23 again. I laughed once, then cried quietly over the sink until my body seemed to understand survival before my mind did. When I finally stopped, I looked at myself. "Okay," I said. The younger Elliot in the mirror looked unconvinced. New rule. I lifted one finger. No giving up my career for a man. Second finger. No dating anyone who says "for your own good" more than twice a month. Third. No expensive alphas with emotionally suspicious cheekbones. That last rule lasted approximately 6 months, but I did not know that yet. At 23, Carter and I had been dating for only 4 months. He was 27 then. Already the alpha founder and CEO of Hail Meridian, a young New York real estate technology company that business reporters had begun calling one of the city's companies to watch. He had ambition, charm, and the unnerving gift of making certainty sound like kindness. I wanted to end it immediately. My thumb even hovered over his name that afternoon. Then I stopped, not because I wanted him, because I remembered how Carter reacted when he believed a decision had been made without him. In my first life, I had spent years letting urgency push me into private conversations where he controlled the terms. This time I had options. I could slow down, protect my work, tell friends what I was doing, and leave in daylight instead of turning my escape into another negotiation. So I made a plan. 2 days later, Aiden arrived in Boston carrying coffee, and a level of curiosity no innocent younger brother had ever brought to someone else's relationship. Aiden Blake, 22 then, Omega communications major, professional collector of admirers, walked into my apartment, put 2 iced coffees on the counter, and asked, "How are things with Carter?" Not hello. Not how is the fellowship, Carter. Aiden had always been beautiful. Dark hair, green eyes, sharp cheekbones, quick smiles. In my first life, we had been close until Carter became a scoreboard. Aiden wanted the restaurant's penthouse, photographs, and visible proof that an important alpha had chosen me. He never saw what happened after the doors closed. I leaned against the counter. Things are things. That sounds bad. It sounds like English. He rolled his eyes, but his attention sharpened when my phone lit up with Carter's name. I did not answer. Aiden watched the screen go dark. "You two fighting?" "No, you ignored him." I also ignore laundry until it develops political representation. That was true. I could catalog 12,000 municipal records without complaint, but folding fitted sheets offended me on philosophical grounds. Aiden laughed, then looked at my phone again, and I knew he remembered something. Maybe not the private years. Maybe not the end, but he remembered the future Carter built, and he remembered standing beside it, wishing the life had been his. I did not give him Carter's number. I did not introduce them. I did not push my brother toward a lesson I already knew would hurt. I simply stopped protecting the fantasy. A week later, Carter mentioned that Aiden had messaged him about a branding internship in New York. 2 weeks after that, Aiden started smiling at his phone whenever Carter's name appeared. By October, I saw a message flash across Aiden's screen while we were having lunch near Harvard Square. "Last night was a mistake. We should talk." See, Aiden turned the phone over too late. His face went white. "Elliot." I put down my sandwich. "How long?" "Nothing happened." That sentence has never improved a conversation. He swallowed. We kissed. There it was. In my first life, I had discovered their emotional affair years later and treated it like proof that I had failed. This time the pain arrived, but it did not own the room. It was simply pain. Sharp, temporary, informative. Aiden searched my face. "Are you going to tell me to stay away from him?" I thought of every warning I had once given him. Every time he had called me ungrateful because he wanted the polished life I was trying to explain from inside. "No," I said. He blinked. "You're an adult. Carter is an adult. I'm not going to manage either of you." "What does that mean?" "It means if you want him badly enough to betray me for him, take responsibility for wanting him." Aiden flinched. I picked up my phone and sent Carter one message. I know about Aiden, we're done. Do not come to my apartment. Anything you need returned can be arranged by mail. Carter called immediately. I declined it. The phone rang again. I declined that too. Aiden stared at me as if I had violated a law of nature. In his memory, I was supposed to cling, compete, beg. Instead, I took another bite of my sandwich. My hand shook slightly. I let it. Courage is not the absence of shaking. Sometimes it is eating turkey on rye while your old future tries to call you for the third time. Aiden whispered, "You're really letting him go?" I met his eyes. I'm letting myself go. That was the first real victory of my second life. I was not sending my brother toward Carter. I was simply refusing to stand between two adults who had already chosen each other badly. Somewhere in the universe, karma opened a spreadsheet, and for once I declined to help with the formulas. 3 months later, Carter and Aiden were officially together. I found out through Instagram, naturally. There they were outside a restaurant in Soho, Carter's hand at Aiden's waist, Aiden smiling up at him like he had just been awarded custody of the moon. The caption read, "Sometimes what's meant for you finds you anyway." I stared at it for 10 seconds, then commented, "Cute photo." Aiden deleted my comment. I laughed so hard I spilled tea on a digitization request. My second life became unexpectedly peaceful after that. I finished my fellowship. I accepted a full-time position at the Museum of the City of New York, working with municipal archives, private collections, historic planning records, and donated corporate materials. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, where the radiator sounded like it was trying to confess a crime every winter. New York had strict workplace protections around secondary dynamics, and the museum treated alpha, beta, and omega status as medical information rather than destiny. I appreciated that. I used a mild scent neutralizing patch on crowded subway days, ignored every lifestyle article claiming omegas were naturally happier with dominant partners, and developed a private allergy to anyone who used biology as an excuse for bad manners. I bought secondhand furniture. I took the subway. I made friends. Real friends, not people connected to Carter. Not social acquaintances screened through someone else's preferences. My closest was Maya Torres, 29, beta, senior conservator at the museum and the kind of woman who could repair a 19th century map while insulting your dating choices with surgical precision. She became aware of Carter approximately 40 minutes into knowing me. "Your ex is on Bloomberg," she said one afternoon. "I'm sorry. No, literally. He's on the television." I looked up. Carter's face filled the staff room screen. Hale Meridian had secured a major redevelopment partnership in Brooklyn. Aiden stood beside him at the press event. Maya looked from the screen to me. "That's your brother?" "Yes." "He's dating your ex?" "Yes." "Are rich people okay?" "No." She considered this. "Fair." Then Dominic Grant walked into my archive room and ruined my no-expensive alpha rule. Our first meeting happened because of a flood. Not a dramatic flood. New York buildings rarely bother with cinematic timing. A pipe burst on the museum's 3rd floor during a February cold snap. Water reached a storage room containing documents on early 20th century shipping infrastructure around New York Harbor, including material donated decades earlier by Grant Maritime, the predecessor to Grant Atlantic Holdings. I was wearing nitrile gloves, an old sweater, and pants with a mysterious line of dust across one knee when a man in a dark overcoat appeared at the restricted access door. "You can't be in here," I said without looking up. "I was told to come here. People are told many things. Some people are told cryptocurrency is a personality." Silence. I looked up. "Oh." That was unfortunate. He was tall. Not gym influencer tall. Doorframe tall. Dark hair. Strong nose. Calm eyes. A face that would have looked severe if not for the small, almost hidden curve at one corner of his mouth. Alpha. Very alpha. Not because he radiated dominance like a scented candle. Because he stood as if he did not need to prove he belonged anywhere. "I'm Dominic Grant," he said. I looked at the box beside me, then at him. "Grant as in Grant Atlantic?" "Yes." "CEO Grant?" "That's what they call me when they want something." I closed my eyes briefly. "Excellent. Is it?" "No." His smile grew. I pointed toward the hall. "CEO or not, this room is restricted while we stabilize water-damaged materials." He stayed where he was. "I came because the museum called our legal department." I'm sure they did. "They said some of our historic corporate documents may have been affected." "They were. Can I see them?" "No." He blinked. I returned to blotting paper. A few seconds later, he said, "People usually say yes to me faster." "That sounds like a developmental problem." He laughed, not politely, actually laughed. The sound surprised both of us. Then he took off his coat. What can I do? I looked at him. Do? To help. I studied him for a moment. Expensive suit, expensive watch, no visible fear of dirty water. I handed him gloves. Hold these folders flat while I move the absorbent sheets. And that was how I met Dominic Grant. Not at a gala, not through an introduction, not under flattering lights. He spent 90 minutes kneeling on a plastic tarp beside me, silently holding damp shipping records while I worked. At one point, water dripped from a folder onto his sleeve. I winced. That suit is probably worth more than my security deposit. He looked at the stain. Then it's finally doing something useful. That should not have affected me. It did. Annoyingly. After the emergency stabilized, he followed me to the staff elevator. You didn't ask for my card. I have Google. That hurts. I'm sure your shareholders will comfort you. The elevator doors opened. He held out his hand. I looked at it, then at him. Is this a networking trap? No, what kind of trap? Coffee. I stared. He smiled. I'm asking you for coffee, Elliot. I had not told him my name. Then I remembered my badge. Romance Weakened Intelligence. Why? Because you ordered me out of a room in my own company's donated archive. That seems like a low standard. And because you made me laugh while standing in 6 gallons of pipe water. Better. And because I'd like to see you again when neither of us smells like wet cardboard. I should have said no. I had rules. I had history. I had a nervous system that still interpreted certain kinds of alpha attention as the beginning of a problem. But Dominic was waiting, not pushing, waiting. So I said, 1 coffee. His expression softened. 1 coffee, public place, obviously. You do not send a car. He looked offended. I was going to send a helicopter. I laughed before I could stop myself. His eyes warmed. And something small and treacherous moved under my ribs. Not love, not even trust, just interest. The first spark of it, like a match struck in a room I had believed was empty. Dominic chose a coffee shop in Greenwich Village, not a private club, not a hotel lounge, not a restaurant where a salad required refinancing. A normal place with uneven wooden tables and a barista who spelled Dominic's name Dominic on his cup. I liked that immediately. He looked at the cup. I have been humbled. You needed it. You've known me 3 days. I work with historical records. I respect evidence. We sat near the window. Outside, snow from the previous week had become gray at the edges. Cabs moved through slush. A delivery cyclist swore at a bus with admirable creativity. Dominic wrapped both hands around his coffee. So. Do you always interrogate dates? I nearly choked. This is a date? His brows lifted. I asked you for coffee because I wanted to see you. I asked if you were single yesterday. That could be aggressive networking. He smiled. Fine. Elliot Blake, would you consider this coffee a date if I officially call it a date? I looked at him. He was teasing. But underneath the teasing, he was giving me control over the definition. A small thing, a huge thing. Yes, I said. His expression changed. Warmth brief and unguarded. Good. I learned that Dominic had grown up in Baltimore and spent summers around shipping yards, because his grandfather believed executives should know what diesel fuel smelled like before discussing freight. He had gone to Georgetown. He hated golf. He liked old jazz. He could cook exactly 4 meals. 1 is pasta, he said. That's not a meal. That's a category. Fine, 3 meals. At the end of the date, we stood outside under a narrow awning while freezing rain tapped against the sidewalk. Dominic looked at me. Can I kiss you? The question should not have hit me as hard as it did. But it did. In my first life, Carter rarely asked. He assumed. He reached. He decided. Dominic stood 6 inches away and waited. The city moved around us. Steam rose from a street grate. Someone ran past with a newspaper over his head. I could smell coffee, wet concrete, and the clean cedar scent of Dominic's coat. Yes, I said. He touched my jaw lightly, not holding, just resting his fingertips there. Then he kissed me, softly. The first contact was almost cautious. A question, I answered by leaning closer. His other hand settled at my waist, warm through my coat. The kiss deepened just enough to make my heartbeat lose all professional standards. When we pulled apart, Dominic's forehead briefly touched mine. I smiled. That was suspiciously competent. He laughed under his breath. I practiced on investment bankers. Explains the emotional restraint. His thumb brushed my cheek. Elliot. Something in his voice made my smile fade, not because it was bad, because it was careful. You don't have to joke if you're nervous. I went still. There it was. Not accusation. Observation. I looked at the rain. I like joking, I know. Sometimes I'm also nervous. I know that too. I looked back at him. He did not ask why. He just said, "We can go as slowly as you want." The large emotional moment came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, less than 2 months after we met. Before I was ready, before I had decided what Dominic meant to me, Carter appeared at the museum. He arrived in the middle of a donor reception wearing charcoal and confidence. I saw him across the gallery. My body reacted before my mind did, shoulders tight, breath shallow, eyes searching for exits, old habits, old architecture. Carter smiled when he reached me. Elliot, I had not spoken to him in nearly 2 years. "Carter, you look well. So do you. Aiden says you don't answer family messages much. My family messages me plenty." His smile thinned. Then his gaze moved behind me. Dominic had just entered the gallery. He was attending because Grant Atlantic had recently funded a transportation history exhibit. Carter recognized him immediately. Most CEOs did. Dominic recognized Carter too. He walked toward us. His attention landed on my face first. Not Carter. Me. That mattered. "Everything okay?" he asked. I wanted to say yes. Automatic. Polite. Old. Instead, I made myself tell the truth. "I'm uncomfortable." Dominic's eyes changed. Not dramatic. Focused. He looked at Carter, then back at me. "Do you want to leave?" Carter's expression sharpened. "We're having a conversation." Dominic ignored him. He kept looking at me. "Elliot?" My pulse slowed. "Yes," I said. "I want to leave." "Okay, that's simple. No confrontation, no contest." Dominic took my coat from the check room, handed it to me, and walked out beside me. Carter called my name once. Dominic did not turn. Neither did I. Outside, the February air hit my face. I made it half a block before I stopped. Dominic stopped with me. I stared at the sidewalk. My eyes burned. "This is embarrassing." "No. I'm 30. You're 25. Right. Reincarnation has ruined my sense of age." He blinked. I froze. That was the first time I had accidentally said anything close to the truth. Dominic's mouth twitched. "Should I ask?" "No." "Okay." I laughed, then, absurdly, I started crying. Not loudly. Tears simply arrived. Dominic did not grab me. He did not tell me to calm down. He stood beside me under the glow of a pharmacy sign while taxis hissed through wet streets. After a moment, he opened his arms. "Can I?" I stepped into them. His coat was cold on the outside and warm underneath. His chin rested lightly against my hair. I inhaled him. Cedar, coffee, winter. Something in my chest finally unclenched. "He was my ex," I said. Dominic's hand moved slowly along my back. I assumed. It wasn't good. His body went very still. He didn't hit me. I didn't ask. I know. People hear "not good" and imagine things. "You don't have to explain it into a category I understand." That sentence broke something open. I pulled back enough to look at him. "What?" His gaze was steady. "If it hurt you, it mattered." I stared at him. The city blurred. Because no one had said that to me in my first life. Not even me. Dominic lifted one hand and wiped a tear from under my eye with his thumb. Then, with a seriousness that should have been ridiculous and somehow was not, he said, "Also, for the record, his tie was terrible." I laughed so suddenly I hiccuped. Dominic looked pleased. "There he is. Who?" "The man who insulted my company records while standing in floodwater." I wiped my face. "You're very annoying." "I'm told it's part of my executive presence." That night, I told him most of the truth about Carter. Not the rebirth. Not yet, but enough. And when I finished, Dominic sat quietly on my terrible mustard-colored couch. Then he took my hand. "You will never have to become smaller to fit beside me." The words settled between us. I looked at him. "Careful. With what?" "You say things like that. I'm going to start liking you." He leaned closer, terrifying. I kissed him first, and this time when his arms came around me, I did not feel trapped. I felt held. There is a difference. Once you learn it, you cannot unlearn it. Aiden and Carter got engaged the following year. The ring was enormous. I know this because Aiden sent me 17 photographs. Not one. 17. Different lighting, different angles. One inexplicably near a croissant, I replied. "Congratulations. The croissant looks supportive," he called immediately. "You're impossible." "You sent me a bakery engagement shoot. It was brunch. Then I apologized to the croissant." He sighed. Behind the sarcasm, our relationship had become strange, not broken exactly, suspended. Aiden wanted me to envy him. I refused. This annoyed him more than anger would have. He had expected my second life to orbit the same center as the first, Carter. Instead, I had moved on, and Dominic made moving on look embarrassingly easy. By then, Dominic and I had been together for 10 months. He had developed habits. Every Thursday, if neither of us had an event, he came to my apartment with groceries and cooked one of his 3 certified meals. Every Friday morning, he left too early and always forgot something: a cuff link, a charger, one shoe. How do you forget one shoe? I was distracted. By what? He looked at me. I looked away. Disgusting, I muttered. He smiled. You asked. He had also become shameless about my apartment. You still refuse to replace these curtains. They have character. They have a criminal history. They were $12. That explains the motive. He never asked me to move. That mattered too. He had a penthouse in Tribeca. I had 600 square feet and a fire escape that faced a brick wall. He slept at my place anyway. Sometimes I woke before him. Those mornings were dangerous, not because anything bad happened, because nothing did. Dominic sleeping beside me was the opposite of performance. One arm under the pillow, hair messy, face softer, his alpha scent muted by sleep. No control, no audience, no reason to impress. I would lie there and realize I trusted a man enough to be bored beside him. That sounds unromantic. It was one of the most romantic things I had ever known. Meanwhile, cracks appeared in Aiden's perfect life, small ones. He called me one night because Carter had suggested he stop taking freelance branding work. He says it looks strange, Aiden said. What looks strange? That I work for small clients. You like that work. I know. Silence. I knew this road. I also knew better than to drag someone off it before they were ready to admit they were walking. What do you want? I asked. Aiden hesitated. I want to keep working. Then keep working, he says. I didn't ask what Carter says. Another silence. Aiden exhaled. You've changed. Hopefully. I was exhausting. He laughed despite himself. For one moment, we sounded like brothers again. Then he asked, Did he ever do this with you? I looked at Dominic across the room. He was on my kitchen floor trying to fix a cabinet hinge. A billionaire CEO on my kitchen floor, in socks, holding a screwdriver. He looked up. I mouthed Aiden. Dominic nodded and returned to the hinge. Yes, I said. Aiden went quiet. How much? Enough. Why didn't you tell me? I almost said. I did. In my first life I had tried. Aiden had accused me of being ungrateful. Dramatic. Spoiled. He thought I was complaining about a life he wanted. But this was not that life. This was a chance to answer differently. I don't think I knew how to explain it yet. Aiden absorbed that. Then Carter entered whatever room he was in. I heard his voice in the background. Aiden's tone changed instantly. Brighter, careful. I have to go. The call ended. I stared at the phone. Dominic stood. He crossed the room and sat beside me. He did not ask what happened. He just leaned his shoulder against mine. I rested my head there. After a minute, I said, He thinks he stole something from me. Dominic's hand found mine. Your brother? Yes. What did he steal? I looked up at him. You really want the honest answer? Always. Years of therapy. Dominic barked out a laugh. I smiled, but the humor did not erase the ache, because Aiden was my brother. Jealousy had made him cruel in my first life, but cruelty did not erase history. We had built blanket forts together, shared a room on family vacations, called each other after bad dates. He had once driven 3 hours because I had food poisoning and convinced myself I was dying. People are inconvenient that way. They are rarely only the worst thing they have done. Months passed. Aiden's calls became more frequent. Carter disliked his friends. Carter thought his clothes were too flashy. Carter questioned why he needed his own bank account. Carter wanted him at every public event. Carter hated when Aiden contradicted him in front of employees. Each complaint sounded familiar. Each one made me colder. But I did not say I told you so. Revenge, I had learned, was dramatically overrated when the person suffering was someone you once loved. Instead, I told Aiden practical things. Keep your income. Keep your lease if you can. Do not sign documents you have not read. Call me anytime. Then came the first truly absurd turning point. Carter and Aiden hosted a holiday dinner in their new Chelsea townhouse. I attended with Dominic. This was a mistake, a hilarious mistake, but still a mistake. Carter spent the evening trying to establish status. Dominic did not notice, or pretended not to. At dinner, Carter casually mentioned a shipping partnership Hale Meridian was pursuing. Dominic said, We passed on it. Carter's fork paused. You passed? Our risk team did. I wasn't aware Grant Atlantic reviewed it. We review most things with our name on them. Aiden kicked me under the table. I looked at him. He widened his eyes. I widened mine back. Sibling communication had survived capitalism. Later, while Carter gave Dominic an unwanted tour of the wine cellar, Aiden pulled me into the kitchen. Is he always like that? Dominic? Yes. Tall? No. Bad at pretending to be impressed? Aiden fought a smile. Carter hates him. Dominic has that effect on insecure men. You like him. I looked toward the doorway. Dominic was returning, listening politely while Carter explained something about Bordeaux. Then Dominic saw me. His whole face changed, not dramatically. Just enough, a private softness. Aiden saw it too. His expression flickered. Something like envy, but different this time. Not envy of money, of ease. "You really like him," he said. I smiled. "Yes." Aiden looked down. Then he whispered, "Carter never looks at me like that." My humor disappeared. I touched his wrist. "Aiden." He pulled away. "Forget it." But I didn't, neither did he. Dominic learned I had been reborn on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. Important things kept happening on weekdays as if the universe had a strong preference for administrative scheduling. We were at his place. I had finally agreed to spend more nights there. Not move in, absolutely not. I had principles. Also, his shower had water pressure strong enough to erase regret, so my principles were becoming negotiable. Dominic was cooking pasta, one of the 3 meals. I was sitting on the counter, drinking wine and criticizing his knife technique. "You archive paper. You're holding the onion incorrectly. You've never cooked for me. Because I respect you." He gave me a look. I smiled. Then my phone rang. "Maya," I answered. She sounded strange. "Elliot, I found something." My stomach tightened. "What? Remember the Hale Meridian donation records we processed last month?" "Yes." The museum had received planning documents from a defunct nonprofit tied to New York redevelopment projects. I had recognized names, dates. In my first life, those records had become part of the financial irregularities that destroyed my career. I remember there are duplicate contracts. I stopped breathing. Dominic looked at me. Maya continued. "Same project. Same scope, different vendor numbers, different signatures. Elliot, this is weird. I already knew. I knew exactly where the pattern led. But it was happening early, too early. In my first life, those records had not surfaced until almost 3 years later. "What do you need?" I asked. "Come in tomorrow." "I will." I hung up. Dominic turned off the stove. "Talk to me." I stared at him. The kitchen smelled like garlic and wine. Rain tapped the windows. The city glowed beyond the glass. I had spent more than a year building something honest with him. Except for the largest lie. I looked down at my hands. "You're going to think I'm insane." Dominic leaned against the counter. "I died once." He went still. I continued before courage could abandon me. "Not violently. A highway accident. Winter, 5 years from now. Or 5 years from then." I don't know how to say it without sounding like I need a neurological exam. Dominic did not interrupt, so I told him. Everything. My first life. Carter. The engagement. The control. The records. The way my career collapsed after I refused to help bury them. The accident. Waking up at 23. Aiden remembering some version of the future. Letting him pursue Carter. Meeting Dominic. By the time I finished, the pasta was cold. Dominic had not moved. I stared at the floor. "Well," he exhaled. "That explains several things." My head snapped up. "That's your response?" "I have follow-up questions. You believe me?" He studied me. "You've known details about Hale Meridian before they were public." I froze. "You predicted the Baltimore port contract would collapse. That could have been luck. You told me a biotech company I mentioned at dinner would be in trouble 6 months before the FDA rejected its application. I read. You once looked at a photograph from 2022 and said, 'That building will be gone in 3 years.' I winced. I forgot." "Yes," he came closer. My chest tightened. "What are your follow-up questions?" His eyes were serious. "In the first life, did we meet?" I stared at him. No, something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly. Grief for something that never existed. "I'm glad." "Why?" "Because if we had met and I failed to find you." He stopped. I slid off the counter. "Dominic." He looked at me. I touched his hand. "I didn't know you." "Good, good?" "Yes." He pulled me gently closer. "Then I didn't waste a life being stupid." I laughed. My eyes burned. "You're accepting reincarnation very calmly." "I run infrastructure across 4 continents. That is not relevant." "You would be surprised what prepares a man for impossible conversations." I rested my forehead against his chest. His arms came around me. After a moment he said, "I'm sorry you lived through that." My throat tightened. "I'm not." He leaned back. I smiled faintly. "I hate what happened, but I like who I became when I stopped trying to be chosen." Dominic's hand rose to my cheek. "You know I'm going to say something disgustingly sincere now. I'm braced. I would choose you in any life." I closed my eyes. "That was terrible. I know, manipulative even, probably." "Say it again." He kissed my forehead. "I would choose you in any life." This time I let myself believe him, not because fate had given us some mystical bond, because Dominic proved his choices in ordinary ways, daily, repeatedly, and love, I had learned, was less about being destined than being consistently considered. The next morning I went to the museum. Maya and I reviewed the files. The evidence was not enough for accusations, but it was enough to preserve, document, report, properly. No secret confrontations, no private warnings to Carter, no chance for him to isolate me. That was another change. In my first life, I tried to solve everything alone. In this life, I used systems. The museum's legal counsel contacted city investigators. An outside auditor reviewed provenance. Federal authorities became involved because grant money crossed state lines. I did not lead the investigation. I was a witness, a record specialist, a man who had learned that truth did not become stronger because you carried it alone. Dominic asked if I wanted his lawyers. I said no. He nodded. Then, 3 days later, I discovered a Grant Atlantic security consultant waiting in the museum lobby. I knew immediately. Dominic was in Washington for meetings, so I called him. "Did you put security on me?" A pause. "I asked someone to make sure you got home safely while the investigation is active." "You asked someone, you did not ask me." Another pause, longer this time. I thought it was prudent. There it was, the flaw hidden inside one of Dominic's best qualities. He solved problems. Companies rewarded him for seeing risk before everyone else, and moving before a committee finished clearing its throat. Usually I loved that about him. Right then, every old nerve in my body heard something else. "I know what is best for you." I closed my eyes. "I need you to be my boyfriend for 5 minutes, not my crisis management department." His voice softened. "Those departments have significant overlap." "Dominic, you're right." The joke disappeared. No defense, no speech about good intentions. I should have asked. My anger lost half its fuel. Annoying man. "I know why you did it. That doesn't make it my decision." "No." He called the consultant away before we hung up. That evening he came home with Thai food and no solutions. He sat beside me while I complained about the investigation, the museum's lawyers, Carter, and a donor who had used the phrase reputational optics 4 times in one email. When I finally ran out of words, Dominic asked, "For future reference, help, advice, or company?" I leaned against his shoulder. "Company. Excellent. I'm highly qualified." That mistake mattered because he repaired it. Carter had treated good intentions as a permanent exemption from consent. Dominic could be wrong without making me responsible for proving he was still a good man. Months later, the investigation remained quiet. Carter knew auditors were reviewing grant records, but his attorneys had convinced him it was routine enough to manage. Aiden knew even less. I hoped, foolishly, that the truth would surface after Aiden found the courage to leave. It did not. Truth has terrible timing, which is how we ended up at the plaza, where Hale Meridian planned to reassure investors with a polished quarterly presentation, while federal agents waited in a private conference room upstairs to serve document preservation demands and request Carter's cooperation. The investigators were not supposed to enter the ballroom. Neither was the audit notice supposed to appear on a 50-foot screen. The ballroom went silent. Not movie silent, real silent. The kind filled with tiny sounds. A glass set down too hard. Fabric moving. Someone whispering, "Oh my God." Carter turned toward his assistant. "Shut it down." She grabbed the presentation remote. The screen froze on a document that had clearly never been meant for investors. Kitchenal Audit Timidity, Preservation Order, Privileged and Confidential. Beneath it sat the name of a vendor I recognized from the duplicate contracts. "What is that?" Carter asked. His assistant looked sick. The board secretary added the audit appendix to the same presentation workspace. Someone advanced into the restricted section. That was not my doing. I would like that officially recorded. The slide vanished seconds later, but the press feed had already carried it to every reporter in the room. Phones rose like a field of tiny black mirrors. Then Hale Meridian's general counsel hurried to Carter and whispered something I could not hear. Carter's jaw tightened. I knew later that the 2 federal investigators waiting upstairs had asked him to step into a private conference room. Carter, furious at the public leak, had refused to leave the ballroom until the presentation was contained. That choice lasted less than a minute. Carter looked at me because I was the only person in the room he knew had ever questioned his records. "You did this. No, don't lie to me." Dominic shifted. His voice remained calm. "Careful." Carter looked at him. For a second, The old version of me expected escalation, dominance, posturing. Instead, Dominic said, "You're standing in a public ballroom accusing a museum employee while your general counsel is trying to get you upstairs. This is not your strongest strategic moment." A journalist nearby coughed to hide a laugh. I loved that man. Aiden stood beside Carter, pale. His champagne glass trembled. "Carter," he whispered, "what are those files?" Carter ignored him. Across the ballroom, the general counsel made one last attempt to wave him toward the side corridor. Carter stayed where he was. A moment later, the two investigators came down themselves, accompanied by hotel security and a board attorney. The investigators reached us. One introduced herself as Special Agent Rebecca Collins, 41, Beta, Financial Crimes Investigator with the FBI's New York field office. The second was Daniel Brooks, 38, Alpha, forensic accountant assigned to a federal grant fraud task force. No handcuffs, no dramatic arrest, no shouting. Agent Collins simply asked Carter to accompany them to a private room to discuss documents related to an ongoing investigation and informed him that his company's counsel had already been contacted. Carter's face remained controlled, but I saw the fear. Not fear of prison, not yet. Fear of losing the narrative. He looked at Aiden. "Come with me." Aiden did not move. That was the first time. Carter repeated, sharper, "Aiden." My brother looked at him, then at the screen, then at me. Something passed across his face. Recognition, not of the documents, of a pattern, being told where to stand, when to speak, what to do. He slowly set down his champagne. "No, one word, quiet." Carter stared. Aiden's hands shook, but he said it again. "No." The investigators led Carter away. No scene, no violence. Just a man in a perfect tuxedo walking across a ballroom while 200 people pretended not to stare. The moment the doors closed, noise exploded. Phones, whispers, journalists moving. Board members disappearing into corners. Dominic touched my back. "Do you want to go?" I looked at Aiden. He stood alone. For the first time all night, he looked 26 instead of polished. Young. Lost. I walked to him. He stared at me. "Did you know?" I could have lied. I didn't. I knew something was wrong with his company. How long? A while. His eyes filled. "You knew what he was like." "Yes. Why didn't you stop me?" There it was. The question I had expected for years. I breathed in. "Would you have listened?" He opened his mouth, closed it. I continued. "In another version of my life, I tried to tell you." His face changed. I knew then he remembered. Not everything, but enough. Aiden looked around the ballroom, then back at me. "You remember too." Dominic went still beside us. I nodded. Aiden's eyes filled completely. I know. I thought you had everything. I know." "You thought you stole my perfect life," I said quietly. "You only stole the part I had finally learned to leave behind." Aiden shut his eyes. "I thought if Carter chose me, then I'd finally." He stopped. I waited. "Be better than me?" I asked. A tear slipped down his cheek. Yes, the answer hurt. But less than I expected. Maybe because envy is pathetic once someone admits it honestly. Maybe because I had already buried one version of our relationship. I was tired of mourning a relationship that was still technically alive. Aiden laughed once, broken and embarrassed. "I'm horrible." "No." He looked at me sharply. "You did horrible things. That's not better. It is if you plan to become someone else." He covered his face. "I spent years trying to take your life." I looked at Dominic. His eyes softened. Then I looked back at my brother, and how did that go? Aiden made a strangled sound that became a laugh. There, a crack in the misery. I touched his arm. "Come home with us." He looked at me. "Oos?" Dominic spoke. "My driver can take you wherever you want." Aiden blinked. Dominic added, "Not to our place. Elliot has informed me guests require committee approval." I stared at him. I said no surprise house guests. Same principle. Aiden laughed again. This one real. The worst night of Aiden's second life ended without revenge. Just take out noodles in my apartment, Maya arriving with too many questions, and Dominic quietly making room at the table. For the first time in years, we were simply people instead of parts in someone else's perfect photograph. Aiden moved out. He kept his money. He returned to freelance branding. He started therapy. And perhaps most shocking of all, he apologized without demanding immediate forgiveness. That mattered. Forgiveness is not a vending machine. You do not insert remorse and receive absolution. A few months later, I saw the change instead of hearing about it. The museum hosted a design fundraiser in Brooklyn, and Aiden's studio had created the campaign materials. During the reception, a curator introduced us to a donor who recognized my name from the Hale Meridian case. "You're the archivist who spotted the records problem," he said. That was impressive. Old Aiden would have gone bright and competitive. He would have mentioned his client list before the man finished the sentence. This Aiden only took a sip of soda and said, "Yeah, my brother is annoyingly good at his job." I looked at him. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. You're making a face. I'm witnessing personal growth. It's unsettling." He bumped my shoulder. "Don't get sentimental in public." That was when I believed the change was real. Not because he had stopped feeling envy forever. People are not renovated apartments. You do not replace one ugly fixture and declare project complete. He had simply learned that another person's light did not reduce his own. Little by little, my brother stopped wanting my life. He started building his own. The first time may have been under that pharmacy sign, when he told me pain did not need to fit a category to matter. Another time happened in Baltimore. Dominic took me to meet his mother. Her name was Eleanor Grant, 63, beta, retired public school principal, 5'4", elegant, terrifying. She opened the door, looked at Dominic, looked at me, then said, "So you're Elliot." Dominic sighed. "Mother, what? You're making it sound ominous." "It is ominous. You've never brought anyone home." I looked at him. He looked betrayed by genealogy. Dinner was wonderful. Eleanor told childhood stories. Dominic tried to stop her. Failed. I learned that at age 9, Dominic had attempted to build a shipping company using toy boats in the bathtub and charged his sister $3 for freight access. Predatory pricing, Claire said over video call. I was 9. You showed no remorse. I laughed until my face hurt. Later, Dominic and I walked along the inner harbor. Baltimore lights moved across the water. The night smelled like cold salt, restaurants, and the faint industrial memory of the port. Dominic held my hand in his coat pocket. "My mother likes you. She threatened to send me baby pictures. She's dead to me." I smiled. Then he stopped walking. "What?" He looked nervous. Dominic Grant, CEO, negotiator, man who had once calmly handled a $3 billion labor dispute. Nervous. "I love you," he said. My heart stopped behaving. Carter had said those words constantly. Dominic's were different because they came with evidence. Remembered coffee, patience after hard days, space before big decisions, and attention he never advertised as virtue. "I love you too," I said. His breath left him. "You do?" "You look shocked." I prepared for several outcomes. Did one involve the harbor? Low probability. Good model. He kissed me beneath the street lamp, warm and unhurried. His hands held my face without claiming it. Presence, not ownership. That night, back at his mother's guest room, we lay awake whispering, because the walls were thin and Eleanor Grant had teacher hearing. Dominic kissed the corner of my mouth. "You're smiling. Your mother showed me the haircut," he groaned. There was no haircut. There was a bowl. A stylist made choices. A bowl made choices. He buried his face in my neck. I laughed silently. His breath warmed my skin. For a moment, teasing softened into stillness. His mouth brushed just below my ear. My fingers slid into his hair. The intimacy between us had grown that way. Not sudden, layered. A hand at my waist while cooking. His knee touching mine under tables. My head on his shoulder in cars. Kisses that sometimes became deeper, slower, full of heat without losing tenderness. The first night we slept together, months earlier, Dominic had asked twice if I was sure. The second time, I covered his mouth with my hand. "If you ask again, I'm charging a consultation fee." His eyes smiled. Then he kissed my palm. That small gesture undid me more than anything dramatic could have. With Dominic, desire never felt like something happening to me. It felt like something we built together. Dominic stood in the middle of the mess while water dripped into a bucket. "I want to say something." "No, you don't know what I'm going to say. You have a moving company face." "I do not have a moving company face." "You absolutely do." He smiled. "Move in with me." "No, Elliot, I'm vulnerable. My ceiling has betrayed me." "Move in temporarily. That is how permanent things happen." "I hope so." I stared. He had learned to use sincerity as a weapon. Unethical, effective. I moved in 2 weeks later. Not because I needed rescuing. Because I wanted to wake up beside him more often than not. We negotiated closet space. I refused to give up my ugly yellow curtains. Dominic compromised by allowing them in the guest room. "Coward," I said. "Diplomat. Domestic life suited us. Not perfectly." Dominic left mugs everywhere. I stacked books on horizontal surfaces until they became architecture. He liked the thermostat at 70. I preferred 67. Our greatest fight involved a dishwasher. You load it like a man who has never experienced consequences. There is no wrong way. I stared at him. Our relationship is in physis. He laughed and kissed my forehead. We disagreed, we repaired. No silence as punishment, no threats, no scorekeeping. Sometimes I still flinched internally when conflict appeared. Dominic noticed. He would pause and ask, "Do you need a minute?" Sometimes I did. Sometimes I took his hand and said, "No, stay." He stayed. That became one of the deepest forms of love I knew. Not never leaving, staying correctly. Dominic proposed in Vermont. I ruined it with soup. We had gone to Stowe in October for a weekend away. The mountains were red and gold. The air smelled like wood smoke and fallen leaves. Dominic rented a small house with a porch facing the trees. I suspected nothing because I am apparently excellent at detecting financial fraud and terrible at detecting jewelry. On Saturday afternoon, we hiked above town. Dominic was weirdly quiet. "Are you sick?" "No." "Business problem?" "No." "Did you break the espresso machine?" He stared at me. "Why would that be your third guess?" "Because you look guilty." "I'm not." Suspicious alpha. He kissed my temple. "I love you." Diversion. At the overlook, the valley opened below us in orange, red, and fading blue. Dominic took my hand and drew a breath. My phone rang. Aiden. Dominic closed his eyes. I answered. "What?" "Emergency. I need Dominic's tomato soup recipe. I'm trying to impress someone." Dominic mouthed, "Hang up." I held up one finger. "You don't cook." "Today I evolve." Then I saw his hand. Inside his coat pocket, holding a small velvet box, I stopped. Aiden continued talking. I hung up on him. Dominic looked at me. I looked at the box. "Oh, yes. Oh, I had a speech. I'm sorry. It was good." "I believe you. It had structure. CEO." He laughed. Then his expression softened. The sunset touched his face. For a second, everything around us seemed very still. Dominic opened the box. The ring was simple, platinum. A narrow line of dark blue stone set beneath the band where only the wearer would see it. Why blue? The first night you told me about Carter, we were standing under a blue pharmacy sign. My eyes burned instantly. That is disgustingly sentimental. I know. I hate it. I know. I love it. His smile shook slightly. Then he lowered himself onto one knee. I covered my mouth. "Elliot Blake," he said, "I don't want to complete your life." My breath caught. "I don't think you need completing." The wind moved through the leaves. "I want to share it. The ordinary parts. The difficult parts. The ridiculous parts. I want every version of home we build. I want the fights about the dishwasher and your criminal curtains, and the mornings when neither of us says anything for an hour." A tear slipped down my cheek. Dominic continued. "I want to choose you without owning you, stand beside you without standing over you, love you without asking you to become easier to love." I was crying fully now, humiliating beautiful. He smiled. "So, will you marry me?" "Yes," he exhaled. "Thank God." "You thought I'd say no?" "I'm extremely predictable." "You once bought a lamp shaped like a duck. It was on sale." He stood. I pulled him into me. The kiss tasted like cold air and tears. His hands held my face. Mine gripped his coat. We laughed into each other's mouths. When we finally separated, I looked at the ring, then at him. "You know Aiden is going to claim he helped." He interrupted. "He'll call it emotional pacing." Dominic groaned. He was right. Aiden did exactly that. By then, Aiden had rebuilt his career, opened a small Brooklyn branding studio, and learned to date without treating affection like a ranking system. When I told him about the engagement, he cried and immediately declared himself best man. The following spring, we married at Wave Hill in the Bronx with a small circle of people we loved. Dominic stood at the end of the garden aisle in a dark suit. When he saw me, his face changed in that same private way it always did. Like the room had become easier to breathe in. I walked toward him, not because fate pushed me, not because society expected it, not because being chosen's proved I had value. I walked because I wanted him, and because he had spent years showing me that wanting could be safe. Our vows were simple. Dominic promised honesty, patience, and room to remain myself. I promised him the same. At the reception, Aiden found me near the garden wall. He looked good, not flashy, just himself. "I'm happy for you," he said. "I studied him. I know." He smiled faintly. "That means more than you think." We stood together for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry I wanted your life." I looked across the lawn. Dominic was talking to Maya, listening with the serious expression he used when someone described a problem he intended to remember. I smiled. "You couldn't have taken this one." Aiden followed my gaze. "No, because it wasn't something to steal." He nodded. That was the final lesson. Carter had built relationships around possession. Aiden had once believed love worked the same way. Someone won, someone lost, someone got chosen, someone was left. But Dominic and I had built something no one could steal because it had never been property. It was consent, habit, trust, humor, repair. The thousand invisible choices that made two lives overlap without one consuming the other. Aiden touched my shoulder. Go dance with your husband. Husband, terrible word? No. I smiled. I like it. Dominic found me halfway to the dance floor. He held out his hand. Mr. Grant Blake. I stared. You agreed we were not hyphenating. I'm trying options. Stop. Mr. Blake Grant? Dominic. Mr. Blake? I put my hand in his. Better. He pulled me close. Music moved through the garden. The city existed beyond the trees. Somewhere, probably, someone was sending an email about quarterly earnings. I did not care. Dominic's hand rested at my waist. My cheek touched his shoulder. He smelled like cedar and spring air. You okay? He asked. I looked up. Yes. Not polite yes. Not automatic yes. Real yes. He kissed my forehead, and I thought about the first life. The one where I had believed love was something I had to earn by becoming convenient. The one where I mistook a polished alpha for a safe one. The one where my brother looked at my beautiful cage and thought it was a palace. Aiden had stolen Carter because he believed Carter was the prize. He never knew what he was taking. Neither had I. That was the irony. In the end, no one stole my life. I simply stopped giving it away. And when I chose myself, I finally became capable of choosing someone else freely. Dominic. Not because he was an alpha. Not because he was a CEO. Not because the world considered him powerful. Because when he offered me his hand, he always left my fingers free. I chose to close them around his, every time. Marriage changed almost nothing, which was exactly what I wanted. 6 months after the wedding, Dominic still abandoned coffee mugs in unreasonable places, and I still bought books faster than our shelves could hold them. The main difference was that he had discovered the phrase, my husband, and now used it whenever possible. At restaurants, my husband will have the salmon. On the phone with Claire, my husband says you're wrong. One rainy Sunday, I found him barefoot in the kitchen making pancakes. You're overusing it, I said. What? My husband. He flipped a pancake. I waited years. You waited too. Emotionally longer. That is not math. He smiled. I wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, and his free hand covered mine. The kitchen smelled like coffee, butter, and rain coming through the cracked window. Happy? He asked. I looked around. Mail on the counter. 2 mugs. My books invading a chair. His jacket hanging where it did not belong. Nothing impressive enough for a magazine. Yes, his expression softened. Me too. Aiden came over that afternoon with Ryan Mercer, 29, beta architect, and the first boyfriend my brother had ever dated without turning the relationship into a competition. Ryan was patient, funny, and completely unimpressed by Aiden's attempts to control restaurant reservations. I liked him immediately. After they left, Dominic and I stretched out on the couch. He read quarterly reports. I read a novel. His hand closed loosely around my ankle, not to keep me there, only because he liked touching me. We had no anniversary dinner that night, no flowers waiting in another room, no surprise trip hidden on his calendar. We had leftovers in the refrigerator and laundry we were both pretending not to see. Strangely, that ordinary mess made me feel richer than any penthouse view ever had. Outside, Manhattan glittered through the rain. Inside, nothing dramatic happened. That was the miracle. In my first life, I thought happiness had to be visible from the outside. Now I knew the best parts of love often looked like nothing at all. A mug beside your book, someone remembering which side of the bed you preferred, a hand reaching for you without demanding you stay. Elliot, Dominic said. I love you, you're distracting me. Answer, I closed my book and kissed him. Familiar, warm, still enough to change my pulse. I love you too, needy CEO. Married needy CEO. I laughed and settled against him. His arm came around my shoulders. For once, the future did not feel like something I needed to predict. We would keep choosing each other freely, daily, without either of us disappearing inside the other. Even quiet days still felt deliberately, wonderfully chosen together. That was enough. It was everything. If this second chance stayed with you, follow the channel and come back for the next BL story. Until then, choose the love that gives you room to remain yourself.